and then we'll get started. So just remember, chapter 1 quiz is due today at midnight. So if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, still got time to finish that up. Also, it is open until midterm, so don't fret and rush if you can't get it done by midnight tonight. Take a little bit of extra time to get the answers right and make sure you're finding that information. So we're going to go over chapters 2 and 3 a little bit today. They're not probably the most exciting chapters. Going to talk a little bit about some research stuff and then like some theory stuff. So I have several links in the resources tab to some short clips and videos about each of the theories, which are going to probably do a much better job than me like just kind of talking to you guys about that. So I'll just talk about each of the theories and what they are, but like they're all like right here on the resources tab, and they're all short little videos, right? So for example, the maturation theory, which I need to change something here. Share sound. Just kind of goes through and gives a brief overview. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just touch base on each of those a little bit in chapter 3, but then refer you guys to maybe watch these, when you got time this week, to just kind of reinforce a little bit more what I talked about. So yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 theories that are covered in chapter, and it's not again necessary that we memorize all that information and know them, but just so that I'm introducing it to you guys, so you are aware that there's different types of theories in regards to learning and development and those different things. So that is in the resources tab, along with all the PowerPoints, all the videos that were recorded for class. That's all there as well. So even though I email it out to you guys, there's still you don't have to look for the PowerPoints. You don't have to look for the email to find the videos. And then also coming up, there's an assignment here that's not due till the 13th, so that's 2 weeks away. But part of the requirement is that you observe like children in a child care setting for like 30 minutes. Okay, so we have access to Campus Kid, to the immersion nest here right on campus, and they're more than welcome to have people come in and observe and visit and stuff. So if you don't have a place to do it, let me know, and we can get you set up there just as easily as wherever. So if you have a place that you can do that, or even if you have nieces and nephews that are very young and a bunch of them together, you can observe that. So we'll talk about what that looks like or what the assignment is like next week in terms of what you're observing, but I just want everybody to be aware that you have to find some young kids, some infants to observe for about 30 minutes or so. If you need help finding a place wherever you guys are located at, please let me know, and I'll help with that. Definitely. Okay, so with that, jump into chapter 2 here. I'm going to make this a little bigger. All right, so this chapter talks about research and assessment a little bit. So not something that we typically do as teachers in regards to research, right? We're not doing a lot of research in our classrooms, but we do a lot of assessment, right? Seeing, how students are growing and developing and where they're at in regards to their understanding of material and content and information and stuff. So here it talks or shows us who some researchers have been throughout through different time periods and stuff. Again, not super important necessarily that we memorize who they are, where they went, time period and stuff, but you'll hear some people probably a little bit more than others, like Locke and Darwin, are probably some names that either you have heard or that you might have heard in regards to like certain research they've done and what we still might use today. For example, Darwin was somebody who did a lot of research on like milestones for kids and when they reach like their developmental milestones, which kind of ties into our different theories that we'll talk about the next chapter. So just know that they're there. And there's some different kinds of research, right? So there's experimental and there's correlational. So if we talk about correlational, means it's like, what is the relationship between two different things, right? Kind of like an if then, or if and, or if I do this, then what happens type thing. So there's correlational research and then experimental research, okay, which basically means that we, cause something to happen or we do something and then we see what happens because of that, okay. Examples here, supplemental food in infancy affect cognitive development in preschool. So if we give children or infants like vitamins, for example, does that change their cognitive development when they're in preschool? And so how do you study that? Well, you give some kids vitamins and some kids you don't give vitamins, right? So there's some different ways that can be done. Now, one thing this book talks about is what the perspective of like multicultural or underrepresented groups looks at in regards to these different ideas and theories and stuff. So if we look at it from a multicultural perspective, typically research has left out like groups that are underrepresented, Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanic, etc. Right? So it's taking a group or a normed group. Typically, it's like white middle class people, right, or students or children or whatever, and they study that, and then they try to use that or spread that for the entire group of people living on the world, right? And that is definitely not accurate because it doesn't represent different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, income level where people live, those types of things. So that's something that I have to take with a grain of salt when we talk about some research that's happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. I think it's starting to get a little bit better where more groups of people are represented in research. So it just will take some time to catch up a little bit. So one other piece of research that I think it is important to at least talk about or to know about is this ethnographic or like qualitative research. So this type of stuff is like open-ended, right? So this would be like somebody living in a community for a year and studying something, okay, or researching something. So it's not just a quick snapshot. It's not just some questions they ask, but it's actually being engaged and involved in that. So that is something. So some of the assignments I have for you guys this semester are you going and observing kids, children, infants, toddlers, etc. And so it's not a true ethnographic study, because if it was, you'd be in there for days and weeks and months or whatever. But that's part of how that occurs, or what happens in ethnographic research is people are just going in and observing and sitting and being there for long, extended periods of time. So it's a good way to get a true picture of what's happening with children or with adults or anybody or anything you might be studying. So assessment, okay, especially with young kids, right? It looks different than when we get into like primary grade, first grade, second grade, all the way up through high school. Typically, when we talk about assessing young children, we're looking more at behavior, okay, and their progress or their achievement, okay, and so it's helping families, and it's helping us as instructors to understand how a child is growing and developing. Okay, so the assessment component is one. As children start to get a little bit older, toddlers, infants, they get into that preschool, kindergarten age, then there's more of the assessment on achievement. Okay, but as you probably are all aware, the accountability component changed back in the early 2000s with No Child Left Behind, and then was updated with Every Student Succeeds Act. So the accountability for us as teachers to ensure that children are learning and developing changed quite a bit during that time. Before, it was kind of, there was some testing and stuff, but schools and instructors weren't really held accountable to those results. But since the early 2000s, now they are held accountable, and that kids need to be learning and demonstrating that they can learn. Now, there's disagreement on what that should look like. You know, should it just be tests? Should it be a performance of something or a project? And so there's still a lot of debate on what that looks like. You probably remember taking a bunch of tests in middle school, high school, right? And state tests and different exams, and that's part of the reason why you had to do that, unfortunately, is because of the accountability. So two different kinds of assessments. You guys hopefully know this already, but we'll review it and talk about it again. So we got summative assessment and formative assessment. Okay, things that we will do as instructors throughout our time as teachers. Okay, so a summative assessment is kind of an overall evaluation, or like a final evaluation or assessment at the completion of something. And so a summative assessment for me would be like to give you guys a final exam based upon the stuff that you learned the whole semester, or a final project. Right? You could do it for children as a summative assessment at the end of the week, or at the end of a unit, or whatever that might be. Okay? So summative, I like to remember the different streams is that it's summing things up. It's bringing it to a conclusion. Formative assessments then are something that I call like an assessment for learning, okay, or while you're learning. So it's to assess something like immediately to determine whether you've learned it or not. And if you haven't learned it, then we go back and reteach it or change it or adjust it. Okay? So the goal for these is to improve either services, improve your understanding of something. And so it's not like a final component. It's to help along that process or that way to help kids. So as a teacher, we do a lot of formative assessments. We might ask for questions. Anybody have questions? The answer says questions, then we might assume that everybody understood. We might ask young kids to go, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you know the answer or whatever. So formative is just kind of a quick, short assessment to determine if kids understood or learned the topic that we were talking about. Lastly, this talks a little bit about this, but assessments to identify disabilities. So there's a couple different things that we use in regards to like determining if a child has a learning disability or speech impairment, physical disability. So there's different scales. There's different for each of those different areas of cognitive development, physical development, emotional development. And so we as teachers won't be experts in like those examinations, but we can do some of the early screenings or the simpler screenings. We might notice that there might be an issue of potential like learning disability there, for example, and then we can refer that to school counselor, or we can refer that to social worker, and then they can help with that process of the testing piece of that. But the assessments that take place then will include like a professional to do the assessment, as well as a lot of information from the family. So like it says here, it works best when you have information from the family about the child, especially younger children, when we as teachers don't all see them all the time, right? And maybe don't communicate with them the same way the family does. So. Hey, like I said, chapter 2, not super long, but just a little bit about research, what it entails, and kind of the maybe the importance of that. So how we got to different theories and ideas and things started from research. And so there's still things out there that we can take a look at and develop. If you want to be a researcher rather than a teacher, you could do that. No, it's not the funnest, I don't think. But you have any questions on that chapter of the research stuff? Okay. So then this is the one that chapter 3 is a little bit longer, a little bit drier. Theories are not the funnest to take a look at, but like I said, there are quite a few in the chapter that I just want you to be familiar with a little bit, rather than like study them and memorize them just for memorization's sake. So So I'll go through each of them, kind of just giving you a little bit of background on them, but then I definitely would recommend that you guys watch those videos to kind of help them make a little bit more sense. Anyway, so the first one is the maturity theory or maturist theory, basically saying that skills are developed in a certain order based upon how kids grow and develop, right? How they mature, and that's the basis behind that. And so what we look at here in this chapter is some maybe issues with that theory or these theories, and also looking at it through that multicultural lens. Okay, so the maturist theory doesn't talk much about or bring into play like the environment. Okay? So children's growth and development here we're talking about can be influenced by their environment, not just how they mature and how they grow and how they develop, right? Like their physical growth and development. Right? So it could be underestimating and undervaluing kids and individuals based upon their age, and it can also lead to cultural bias because some families, some groups of people, some ethnicities do things at different times as kids grow and develop. Right? So we have to think about that as well. And these things play a role for us as teachers. These theories play a role to us as teachers in regards to maybe what we believe or what we do in our classroom, how we do things. So that's also why we talk about them, but then also why we have to kind of think about how they might look and how they might be applied to our students and families. So this one is a pretty, I don't know, it's probably more well known, a behaviorist theory, right? So behaviorist or behaviorism talks about that human traits are acquired through experiences within their environment. Okay, so their environment could be a variety of places, right? If you think of an infant's environment, it's going to be basically their home, right? And whoever might be living in that home, whether it's their mom or dad, or just their mom, or their grandparents, or aunt and uncle, their siblings, whatever that might be. And then it also can include if a child goes to daycare or not, or if they go to visit a lot of places, on consistent basis. So the environment can be a lot of things, but we as adults can purposefully shape desired learning and behavior through positive reinforcement, right? So we as adults with like either our own children or the kids that we have in our classroom can shape kids very much based upon what we do with them, the learning activities we do, the environment we provide for them, the colors we put on the wall, all kinds of stuff, right? So how we put that environment together can really shape kids. So looking at it through the multicultural perspective, right? Many behaviors are not rewarding. For example, it talks here about language learning. Okay? So if you have a child, so if kids are, for example, multilingual household, or maybe they speak a different language at home than they do at their daycare or or Head Start or whatever it might be, that the behaviors are not rewarded for the language being spoken at home if that language is not spoken at school or daycare or whatever. So what's a way that we can, in terms of the behaviors theory, if we as a teacher knew that Lakota was being spoken quite a bit at home, we would want to try to incorporate that into our classrooms, okay? Or Spanish or whatever. So educational programs designed around behaviorist principles only don't always have a good track record. Some cultures don't use praise as a reward. Okay, so behaviorism praises the behavior, the skill, whatever it is that we're trying to get the students to do. Behaviorism praises that. It might be through grades, it might be through some kind of food reward, it might be through other kind of intrinsic rewards. But some places or cultures don't do that. Okay, So if that's the case, a kid might be overwhelmed. A kid might be they're not sure what to do, right? If that doesn't happen at home, then that's something that is just new to them, right? So we have to be aware of that a little bit. Okay? The next one we talk about is the psychoanalytic theory. So this here talks about ability to resolve key conflicts between desires and impulses and pressures from the outside world. So basically, talking about, or you have kids have an impulse, right, or a desire. Maybe they want to throw something, or they are angry at something, and so they start crying or whatever it is. So working, the outside world says you're not supposed to get angry and throw things. And so we try to control that, or try to change that. Okay? So that's something that this theory kind of focuses on. And here, Sigmund Freud and Erik Erikson are two people that really kind of look at this theory and researched it. Maybe you've heard the id, the ego, and the superego, which is some personality components that Freud talks about. And I talked a lot in classes about kids being very egocentric, especially young kids, meaning that they only know about themselves, right? And how they feel. They don't always know that, like, my friend or my classmate or somebody I go to daycare with has an opinion different than me, or thinks of something different than me. And so when they talk about it, I don't believe it, or I disagree with it, or I get mad at them, or whatever. So, so those things play into the psychoanalytic theory. And then also, like Erikson talks about these different behaviors that take place as we grow and develop. Okay, so if you think about a baby all the way up to 18 months old, their big thing that they were working on is who they can trust and who they do not trust, right? So as a baby is born, right, some of the very first people that they begin to trust are those that are closest to them and take care of them the most. That might be a mom, it might be a dad or a grandparent or whatever, and it might also be somebody that works at a daycare center, because they are holding them, they're talking to them the most. So they come in contact then with somebody they don't recognize, a voice they don't recognize, a smell that's different, then they have to figure out whether or not to trust them or not trust them. And as kids grow and develop, it changes, right? It gets a little bit more complicated. So looking at this from the multicultural perspective, based on personal observations of a small sample. So once again, not a large group of underrepresented people and different cultures. And so it's a very narrow range, right? So we go back to these different emotional states here, only 4 of them, right, to try to fit into a lot of different emotional states that could potentially come forward. So again, this is very narrow in regards to what that looks like. But again, remember, if you go to those videos, they'll do a better job of explaining and have some visuals and all that stuff. The next one, cognitive developmental theory. Okay, that knowledge is constructively or constructed by us as learners and individuals actively. So something happens, a situation comes up, and we have to try to make sense out of it. And our experience of either being in a position or a situation similar to that, or we don't have any idea, but we try to work our way through it. Okay, so basically, this theory says that we figure things out by experience, okay? Not just by us as a baby sitting there listening to your mom talk about how to walk. We don't. Maybe that happens. We don't know. Babies can tell us that, right? But we know that they might see other people walking. They might try to move their legs. They fall down. They figure out balance, all that stuff. So if you can take that idea and then put it into different situations, like I've never played with three other kids my age before. I don't know how to do that, but I'm gonna just go in and try it out. Okay? So there's different stages to that. So Jean Piaget might be somebody you guys have heard of before as well. He came up with the 4 stages of cognitive development: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. So sensory motor starts at a very young age, right, with babies and infants. And that starts with like your senses, right? You're figuring out seeing things, hearing things. Maybe you like noises, you don't like certain noises. So you're starting there, and then you work your way up until you get to be, into the teenage years, where you're finally formalizing all those different operations and things that you'll be working or using as you continue to grow and develop. So the critique here, and looking at things from that multicultural perspective, is that kids are more intelligent and competent than Piaget first originally suggested. And then his emphasis on thinking skills is very westernized and male-oriented, which again is unfortunately what a majority of the theorists, that's the areas that they focused on, right, was that Western way of looking at things, the white middle class, children and families, and stuff. So some of these, can be very skewed to have some bias. But his role did emphasize culture and environment, right? So environment plays a big role in children growing and developing and learning and understanding. If you, as a parent or as a teacher, working with young kids, read to your kids in your classroom 3 or 4 hours a day, do you think they're going to have better reading and listening skills than somebody who does, some kid that same age who doesn't have any reading? They will. So that's a product of the environment. And so environment and culture, which is an important component of Piaget's, does play a big role in their beliefs and skills and knowledge. Next one then, Neo-Piagetian theories. So basically saying that progress or development for kids can develop unevenly across individuals and does vary with the kids. Okay. And so if you think about that, that's partially true, right? Kids grow and develop at different rates. Some kids walk when they're 9 months old. Some kids walk when they're 15 months old. So it just kind of depends upon genetics. It depends on the environment, and it depends upon their understanding. So some things about some critiques on this. It does address, so there's not really, from what I can gather here, a lot of critique, right? But it does talk about the importance of individuality, and it does talk about diversity in the development. So those are important things. Important things to combine. So as we're going through all these, right, there's not one, most of us as instructors or teachers don't really believe specifically in one way, and that's the only way that, I believe kids grow and develop, or that we learn. We take a combination of these theories and piece them together. The sociocultural theory: kids or children construct knowledge of the world through social interaction and verbalization. Vygotsky, who's another probably person or theorist that you've talked about or heard about, kind of came up with this theory. Now, to me, this is very similar to the cognitive development theory, where they talk about knowledge is constructed by our experiences, right? So experience, very similar to social interactions and verbalization. And so we as adults can set up different situations in our classroom for kids to learn and grow and develop. Again, construct knowledge through action and through language. So how do we learn to talk? Do we learn by reading books? Probably not, right? We learn by listening, right? We hear our family members, our friends, different people that might, that we might be exposed to. we learn how to speak that language based upon what we hear, right? So if we hear English, if we hear Lakota, if we hear French, if we hear Ojibwe, whatever it is, that's what we're hearing, that's what we're picking up, that's what we're understanding. Okay, so language is a big piece of that. So that's why it's important in early childhood when we're doing things with those young kids in our class that we're talking to them. Okay? Language is very, very important in child growth and development. Okay? The more they're exposed to, the better they understand, the better they comprehend whatever language it is that we're speaking to them. Okay? So kids who don't get exposed to books at home or even adult conversation, doesn't necessarily have to mean adult conversation to that young child. It can be conversations between adults, between other people in the household. The more kids are exposed to that, the better they will understand it, they will learn it, they'll hear it and stuff. So it's important to get kids involved, young kids involved with that. Some positive things for Vygotsky's work. It was incomplete, but development is seen as a social and collective working rather than just a strictly individual component. There's an emphasis on culture. Again, I think I talked last week about like how culture can be a culture or a background of like an ethnic group or a group of people. It can also be a culture of like a family, right? Maybe they do things very specific and different than other people do, like within their communities and stuff. So we have to think about that culture piece that can include a variety of different groups of people. So, and then he also talked about it was not exclusively or developed as a Western way in regards to that theory. So there's some positive components in these theories, and you can. I don't have the years in here, and maybe it talks about the years in the book, but as we progress closer to like where we are today, theorists and researchers started, realizing that there's more groups of people out there than just the middle class white people, right? To look at and kind of study and understand and growth and development stuff. So some of the theories start to become a little more diverse and bring in different perspectives. Information processing theory. Knowledge is acquired by applying specific thinking processes to pay attention, to store, remember, retrieve, modify information. So basically, what are ways for us to remember certain things? And what are some ways for us to retrieve certain things? Okay. Example that I often talk about, you've heard me talk about this before. This is a little older than early childhood, but when I taught in middle school, I used to do things, I used to have word walls, right? So I'd have words that we were in, phrases we were using in different subjects that were important that I wanted my students to remember. And so they had them up on the wall. The kids could see them, refer back, look to them. And so when the time came for a test or an exam or a quiz, I would take those off there, right? And students would be working on the exam or the test, and I'd see them look up to the wall and then go back down. So one way that they would remember something is they knew they could almost see where that word was up there, and they looked up to that spot. That helped trigger the memory. Okay, so that's one example of that. Okay, young kids do things, different ways. They may look to a certain spot. You might sing a song to remember something, right? If I want to remember how many days are in the month of August, I use the 30 days, half September, April, June, and November, and then I can remember which one. So there's different ways that we go about doing it. This theory says that that we all do that in one way or another. One critique of this does talk about it might be too narrow, right, in regards to specific learning situations and the way we do things, and it does not always include the role of culture and cultural variations in regards to that. So this one talks about the ecological systems theory. I know in a couple classes I talk about this, Grothenbrenner, and this talks about that growth and development is influenced by different circles of influence. Okay, and so starts at the microsystem, which is a smaller group of students or people that influence things, a smaller group, and then it kind of goes out to a larger group and larger and larger, right? So we think of the microsystems as our immediate environment. It could be our parents, it could be our grandparents, family members, whoever is very close in that environment, and we have a lot of connection with. We talk to a lot, we're engaged with them a lot. And then we start branching out, right? So mesosystems, ecosystems, macrosystems. So macrosystems might be things like certain laws or policies that that we have to follow as adults, or that schools have to follow. Right? And so because they have to follow the certain policy, a certain way that things we have to teach in our classrooms, things like that. So just think of these layers of influence as being very close to start with in the microsystem, and then kind of working their way out until they get out to like a government type system who we may not communicate with or be in contact with every day, but it's something that they do. Policy they created has an effect on what we do, maybe as a teacher. So the analysis here, the critique here of this, again, limited support, limited study, and also very culturally sensitive. Right? For example, most useful in identifying social issues concerning kids in poverty are those of historically underrepresented groups. So, I mean, that's a positive component, that it can be culturally sensitive, because it takes the perspective that, you know, the layers of influence, including that micro influence, are those that are immediate and closest to us, and then kind of works their way out. Right? So it does also take note that some of those influences from the macro level could be negative influence, because there's policies that could be discriminatory, or they're not effective towards certain groups of people. Last couple things here talk about neuroscience and theories of development. And so it's basically like studying of the brain, which can be tricky a little bit with young kids, right? In regards to studying their brain, what that looks like, getting permission from family members to go about doing that. So as we have, you know, come into the 2000s and even in the 90s, maybe 80s, there's had been some development in the use of that brain research, right? So now we have MRIs, which are not invasive, right? We don't have to hook things up to our brains to figure out how they're working, right? We can do MRIs that help us see what's going on in there. So things will continue to grow and develop as well. So yeah, there's a lot more that could that we could go talk about, go into, but as I mentioned, the best way to kind of get a better summary, this here, of what all these theories are about, is to look at the resources tab and check out each of those videos. Right? Again, they're not super long, so it's something that you could, I mean, for all of them, maybe set aside an hour, if that, right? But they're anywhere from 5 to maybe, I don't think any are 10 minutes long. Some might be 7 minutes long. There's some Khan Academy videos on there from that. Khan Academy is a great resource for anything, actually. If you're studying something, whether it's math or different theories from classes, that they typically do short videos of breaking down, you know, what some of those things are. But yeah, all these from Vygotsky's cognitive development to the maturation theory, short little clips to help us kind of understand a little bit more what these theories are kind of. I'm not going to ask if there. I mean, I'll ask if there's questions, but but I know that's probably not. But just a lot of information that I kind of rambled through. So chapters 2 and 3 quiz. Okay, use your notes, use the book. Use Google. I don't care what you use to look for the answers for them, but feel free to use whatever you want. There is a discussion post, right? So as we pop this up, so I'm talking about Piaget here on this discussion post, okay? So here it talks about children being able to conserve, which is one of the components in Piaget's stages. So the accomplishments are a function of their culture and the requirements of that culture for survival. So think of a list of skills that were necessary for you or members of your family to survive during the time when they were young children. Don't think of survive as like a deathly situation, but like what are some things that you had to do as a child or as a kid, even a middle school kid, doesn't matter. Compare and contrast how those skill sets different, might be from culture to culture, or maybe think of comparing what you went through as whichever age you pick, whether you're thinking of middle school or elementary, compared to middle school kids now. So what I can think of here now, I had to have phone numbers memorized for people that I wanted to call, right? How many of us now have phone numbers memorized? Okay. Probably not too many because we just look them up on our phone, like I can call such and such, and I have their number programmed in there. Okay, so that I don't know. I mean, that's not a survival skill set, but if I was somewhere and lost or got sick, I need to know what my home phone number was, phone number to my grandma or somebody so that we could call them. So that's a skill set that they needed for survival, for example. But what are some things that you can think of based upon your experience growing up that you needed to know to be able to survive? Or, survive is probably not the best word, but I can't think of a different one right now. Prosper, continue to do things every day. Tie your shoes, maybe. Now you can. A lot of people have just slip-on shoes, right? So I mean, that's important. So try to think of some and pop those in there. Again, you do not have to respond to anybody on this one if you don't want to, but I kind of want to get some discussion going a little bit as some of us are doing this, here face to face, and some of us are kind of online too. So we'll get some of that going. If you have questions on this, you kind of get started on it, you're not sure what I'm talking about, let me know. Look in the book for Piaget's theory, right, in chapter 3. That'll help you, maybe give you some ideas in there as well. So 3 assignments for this week: chapters 2 and 3 quiz, and then the chapter 3 discussion post. If you haven't done the chapter 1 quiz yet, it's still open till tonight at midnight. Other questions? Destiny, you got any questions? I know you popped in a little late, but. If you're talking, I can't hear you. Let me see. Stop recording.